but how come their teachings don't actually say that we should take over the world and destroy it, you know? So I have a problem with that, but I do defend his right to ask the questions. And it's good. I mean, he may not be an intellectual, but he's doing an awful lot of research, and he deserves, you know, some credit for his pugnacity and sheer tenacity of will at trying to get the truth. And in the Brian Rose interview, what comes across is this: he's a man totally devoted to truth. Well, so am I. You know, I recognise a kindred spirit. It's just that I bothered to get an academic training because I love truth so much that I spent 20 years pursuing degrees and a PhD and training as a teacher and sharpening my mind so that I can work at an intellectual level of sophistication where I can hold 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 10, 20 hypotheses all at once, and then work out the variability and the probability of them all, and then try and come up to a mathematically probabilistic solution. But all the time maintaining my heart energy, so I'm not just like a thinking robot machine, but actually looking at it from a spiritual heart perspective as well. You know, I wish, anyway, I wish David Icke was better at being David Icke, because the trouble is the way he comes across is a ranter, and he's against everything, which then really gets the establishment against him. And then the conversation doesn't progress. If only he would go back, you know, and learn a bit of ethics and a bit of, like I say, proper intellecting, to use Abelard's phrase. He talks about intellecting as a verb. The conversation would be more sophisticated. But I'm still willing to have a public debate with him. I also don't agree with him on another matter, well, 2 other matters. I don't agree with his total attack on the Enlightenment and he keeps calling them the Illuminati, as if it's a dirty word. And he really doesn't like Adam Weishaupt, who he absolutely castigates. And he's part of this, it's an anti-Enlightenment cult that's spread on the internet, and InfoWars and all these people propagate it, that Adam Weishaupt was the devil himself, and the Enlightenment is, you know, a cult. Well, these people simply, I don't know, have they never studied history? Do they know nothing about the intellectual history of the last 300 years? The Enlightenment was an incredibly hard-won fight for freedom of thought, freedom of information, and the freedom not to be tortured. Beccaria was one of the great thinkers of the Enlightenment, who said, the first Italian jurist, people have a right not to be tortured. I mean, do we want to undo that? You know, no, we don't. Montesquieu was another great Enlightenment thinker who said, actually, people have the right to be governed by responsible representatives who are accountable to the people, who have to abide by high ethical standards and then report back to the people in democratic elections when they can be held to account. You know, is that, I mean, that was the very thing that these anti-Enlightenment fanatics, of which I think David Icke has a danger of drifting into their company. And Steve Bannon is another, and Nigel Farage is another. These anti-Brexit, you know, anti-Enlightenment, anti-expert sort of fanatics, is the very thing they're knocking is actually the thing that guarantees my freedom of speech to talk to you, and your freedom of thought to listen to me, and our freedom to be thinking adults, right? I mean, in the European Union, that's guaranteed by the Charter of Rights, which Baroness Scotland, who's the head of the Commonwealth now, a great, wonderful legal thinker in Britain, Labour Party politician as was, member of the House of Lords, she helped draft that Charter of Rights, which Britain is now, you know, a million miles from. That's why I love the European Union. We have a Charter of Rights, and freedom of speech and thought and belief is part of it. Britain should rejoin the EU and sign up to the Charter of Rights, in my opinion. And because, I mean, even poor old David Icke, you know, his rights are pretty non-existent at the moment. You know, he'll be shot or put in prison before we can blink. That's wrong. He has the right to say his stuff, even though I don't agree with some of it. So I don't like his castigation. And as for Weishaupt, he was only a philosophy professor like me. He was a good man. He set up some little secret Masonic society, but it had hardly any members. And he just thought we should all be good Pythagoreans and live in harmony and truth. And he used to draw, triangles on the board and explain to his disciples that, this is the sacred Pythagorean symbol, I swear you to the brotherhood kind of stuff. I mean, it's really not dangerous, subversive, except insofar as knowledge, truth, and enlightenment is subversive of evil, corruption, and the conspiracy that was keeping mankind back in a sort of pre-scientific, feudalistic lockdown, where, villagers weren't even allowed to leave their village for most of the Middle Ages. You weren't allowed to go, wander over to the next valley or whatever very often. You were stuck into like serfdom. Well, the Enlightenment got rid of all that stuff, and it brought in the notion of human rights. We got it early in Britain, 1688, John Locke. We had our kind of early dose of the idea of human rights as being something that's inalienable and given to us by God, who is the ultimate creator of all this. The underpinner, as Kant would say, of all morality. Kant's another figure that I love and revere. I studied with the great Kantian philosopher Stephan Korner when I was a young man at the University of Bristol studying philosophy, and I won't undo my respect for Kant and the Enlightenment tradition that he represents. He's a critical thinker. Without Kant, there'd be no Hegel, there'd be no Marxism, there'd be no intellectuals really. There'd just be ranters. So that's subject to everything I'm saying, please, to your own research, your own critical reason, as Kant would say. But what Kant wanted above all was a Europe and a world of peace. He thought that if we could think freely, discourse freely, analyse our thoughts and each other's opinions and so on, and subject them to critical reason, we would ultimately discover, A, democracy is the best system, because it's a system of governance whereby we're able to go on debating in freedom of thought and find the best solution to our social and political and economic and all the other problems. Secondly, we could have some sort of European peace zone. Actually, he was a forerunner of the European Union. He wanted all the European nations to not attack each other anymore and keep going to war, as they had been doing. He was a peace visionary, old Kant. And so he's my, line manager in heaven, so to speak. So I don't agree with David Icke on his attack on the Enlightenment. I stand with Kant, and I wish he'd study a bit more. The other thing that, however, where do I agree with Icke? Okay, I agree with him. What's amazing is he's just published this new book on 9/11, and I didn't know he was writing it before last week. Well, surprise, surprise, I've also just written a book on 9/11. And we've both published this enormous work. Mine is 2 volumes, 950 pages. His apparently is 900 pages. And neither of us knew the other guy was writing a book about the history of 9/11. I don't know what his book is like. I haven't read it. I'm going to suggest to him that we swap books. He should read mine and I should read his. And then we should have a public debate about 9/11. Because I do think that it's an incredibly important issue to raise. And I agree with Icke that the official story of the Bush Commission was a complete, farrago of lies. Anyone that's looked into it, and many researchers throughout the world in Britain who've looked into it have realised that it was simply lies. He has plumped for a particular explanatory framework for who was behind it, which is, for him, is this death cult, which he calls it, of Sabbatai Ziva and Jacob Frankists, who've infiltrated, apparently, Wahhabi Islam, sort of modern secular Judaism, and I think he thinks they've tried to take over the Catholic Church. I'm not sure. It's one of the things I'll ask him when we get to debate. I'll also try and find one of these people that he can sit in the debate with us. If Gershom Scholem was alive, he could have joined the debate. But there are scholars that are on that could. So in my book, I don't say that. What I say in my book is that, having looked at all the evidence, I say the Bush Commission is actually lies, it's deliberate deception. But I put forward about 10 or 12 hypotheses as to what might have been behind it, behind the events of 9/11. And I'm going to have to add David Icke's hypothesis, that's number 13 in my second edition. And I say there isn't enough evidence yet to be able to make a firm decision on this. If David Icke thinks he's got that evidence and he can now 100% say who it was, then fine, let him be heard. I will subject his evidence to forensic historical scrutiny, and if it stands up, I will let you know. But on the other hand, if it doesn't, then I will also let you know. And that's how historians operate. What I do say is that I'm in the middle of setting up an international historical commission of inquiry into 9/11. A bit like Sacha Stone has set up this international inquiry into the weaponization of the biosphere. So I'm setting up a similar thing, the International Commission for historians to look at 9/11. Now, interestingly enough, no historians have ever done it before. I'm the first historian, properly trained, academically qualified historian, to actually write a book in detail and analyse 9/11, which I find unbelievable. Where are all my historical colleagues? I'm hoping to winkle out at least one per country, and the International Historical Commission will consist only of qualified historians at a PhD professorial level. So David Icke, I'm afraid, won't be able to join the commission, but we will take testimony and evidence from people like David Icke and anyone else that's got a hypothesis. Even people like David Ray Griffin. I mean, he's not a historian, he's a theologian. He's a very good man, he's passionate about this issue, so his evidence, we will take it. He's done huge amounts of research, but he's not a historian. I'm saying it's time for the actual historians to get involved. So that's what I'll be doing, and I'd be happy to, talk to David Icke about any evidence he's got that stands up in the court of history. And if not, then, well, I'm sure he would rethink his hypotheses. I think, you see, Sir Karl Popper, who I heard lecture at the University of London before he died, he said the mark of a scientific hypothesis is that it can be falsified. You have to be able to put forward something that, yes, you can accumulate evidence that proves it's right, but you can also counterprove it by having evidence that proves it's wrong. If David Icke's theory is scientific, then we can prove it right, or we can prove it wrong. I'm not sure if he's yet subjected his, hypothesis to that test, but I'll see. So, okay, moving on, I also want to just say a little bit, because it's Easter, about the Mary Magdalene mysteries, because I did create the Mary Magdalene Studies Association a couple of years ago with a friend, and it's now, still carrying on. We were going to have a conference on July the 22nd here in Bétet to honour the Mary Magdalene Day. I hope France will be over lockdown so that we can have that conference and bring together scholars. They were due to come from all over the world. I pray and pray that that's possible. The only way it can happen is a truth resurrection. Buddhists say that Buddha's body's gone, but his Dharmakaya, the Dharma body, lives on. I'd say the same with Christ, His Dharmic body lives on, and if we as a planet can resurrect the Dharma, the truth body, and it's kind of both Christ and Buddha's body and all the other saints collectively, if we can resurrect truth on this planet, then we can have our Mary Magdalene conference on July 22nd. But we're going to have to work, folks, because at the moment we're stuck in lockdown. There's a Facebook group for that. There's a newsletter I can send you. If you're interested in the Dharmic body of Christ and the Mary Magdalene mysteries, then, email me. I also want to say that I'm speaking on behalf of the Commonwealth Interfaith Forum. And I want to just say about the Queen's message that happened just after I recorded my talk last week. The Queen gave a message from Windsor Castle, and I thought it was a good message. Thank you, Your Majesty, for a good message. I liked especially that you mentioned prayer and meditation as something we might be doing in our lockdown. That's what you should be saying, because you're head of the church, of the Anglican Communion, which I'm also a member of. And it's important that we keep alive our spirituality in these dark times. So I think that message from the Queen was excellent. And from the Commonwealth, 53 nations are in lockdown around the planet. I have dear friends all over the Commonwealth, in Australia and India and Canada and Mauritius and wherever. We're all in this together. That's the idea of the Commonwealth Interfaith Forum, is that we share our common wealth and we work together for a world of peace, justice and truth. And Britain has given a lot of important scientific expertise to the world, with people like Newton and Francis Bacon and many great scientists. I was appointed to my academic post as director of my institute and research development officer way back at the University of London by some great scientists who were working for peace. Well, that's what the Commonwealth should be doing, and so we need to have a climate of veracity and accuracy in our research, and our purely scientific studies should go hand in hand with ethical work. And this is where I agree with the scientific attempt to get an oath of probity for all science doctorates, like the Hippocratic Oath when doctors graduate. So scientists should take a similar oath, that they would never use their knowledge for creating weaponization of mass destruction of the biosphere or anywhere else. This stuff should be illegal. It's immoral. It should be illegal. Okay, the problem is then, well, you can say, yeah, but if we don't do it, what if they're doing it and we're not doing it? So scientists are trotting into Portland Down as we speak near Salisbury, saying, well, we've got to do this because the Chinese are doing it. And the Chinese are doing the same. They're trotting into their labs saying, well, we've got to do this because the British and American are doing it, and the Israelis. Okay, so, you don't have to be a genius to work out that the solution here is everybody puts their tools down at once, synchronistically. And that's my proposal for a universal, across-the-board arms cut to 5% of current spending. Now, I'm proposing for that to happen that the UN create a standing conference on disarmament and demilitarization, which would take place in New York, a standing conference, and it would meet every day of the year from now until that treaty is finally signed. We have to, and it might have to meet in virtual space to begin with. The Commission on Peace Building of the UN should run that and set that up. There has to be a standing conference which isn't allowed to go home till they sign the treaty. It's the only way you get a pope elected sometimes, is shut the door on the cardinals and make them vote. I think sometimes they were locked up in there for weeks. Got to do the same with the UN leaders and get this treaty through. And I'm sorry, it's 5% only of the military budgets are going to be allowed to remain, according to my protocols. And I'd like all peace thinkers and people of conscience to support that campaign, and to campaign through their UNAs, through their ministries of foreign affairs in their respective countries to call for this, because countries, the UN is a funny thing, but it operates with countries. I'm not a country, I'm just a random philosopher, but I know a lot of people in positions of influence around the planet, and I'm calling on them to activate their national voice at the UN to call for a standing conference on disarmament and demilitarization, and to get behind this idea of a budget cut down to 5% of current levels, including in biological weapons research. And if it's simultaneously in China, as in America, as in Israel, as in Britain, nobody is going to grumble, because we've all got the same relative stuff. America still remains the biggest superpower, You know, Iceland still only has like a couple of rowing boats. But that's fine. Who'd want to invade Iceland? They're just nice, friendly people that stick bankers into prison when they break the law. And Scotland probably won't have more than a few boats when it gets its peace independence. So anyway, that's that. I want to talk about another project I've been working on this week, which I keep hoping I'll publish, and it keeps dragging out. So it's going to be out in the next few days, quote unquote. And this is secret. Don't tell Dr. S.L. Gandhi, who is my Indian colleague, because it's his 85th birthday present. As some of you know, I've been to India many times, invited by the Jains, Acharya Mahapragya. This book is Dr. S.L. Gandhi's testimony to Mahapragya, and it's a marvellous read. HarperCollins published it. Do read it. It's so insightful, because Mahapragya was a great genius intellectually. We met a few times and exchanged, a few words, but in a room full of people, I just got to ask a few questions. I wish we'd sat down and had a proper chat. But it's, maybe in the Dharmic body and the heavenly library we'll be able to have a chat. But he had thought through the nature of non-violence in real forensic detail. And that's what I love about his thinking. And then in his personal life practice, he was working on, non-violence. And this influenced Dr. Gandhi, who then has created these international gatherings for peace activists. I went to the first one in '96 in Ladnon in Rajasthan, and I met Mahapragya and Acharya Tulsi, who was his teacher, and Dr. Gandhi for the first time. It was when I was running the School of Non-Violence for the Gandhi Foundation in London, and doing a lot of research on Gandhi's teachings on non-violence, and lecturing at the University of London in peace studies. So what I think is important is that all these declarations over the years should be put into one volume. Now it's a surprise for Dr. Gandhi, it's his birthday present, don't tell him I've done it. But it's already nearly 200 pages and it's about to be published, and I'm making it available to anyone that wants. It's the first time anyone's thought of doing this. I don't know what's wrong with people. I should have done this years ago. It's like all these peace declarations that interfaith conferences keep coming up with, and peace conferences and treaties and so on. I'm putting them into one volume for the first time so that you can read them. And I'm covering the years from 1990 to 2020, so that's a 30-year period. And there have been some great declarations. I mean, I've written about 4 of them myself. They're in there. Only as I've kind of condensed down what the conferences said. And more recently, because I've got involved with the World Intellectual Forum, which I'll talk about shortly, I've also included their declarations and so on. So this is an interesting, it's called the Little Book of Peace Declarations. It started out as being a little book of 50 pages, but now it's already up to 200. And I hope you enjoy reading it. It'll be available shortly. I also want to second the wonderful call by the UN Secretary General, Guterres, who's called for a global ceasefire. We now have a General Secretary of the UN who's actually worth his pay grade, who's actually doing stuff and not hiding in the cupboard. Thank you. Keep going. and look, it looks like somebody's listening. The Saudi Arabians have actually declared a bit of a ceasefire with the Yemen war. That is so bonkers and immoral that it makes you think we've been invaded by Darth Vader forces from another planet. I mean, these people are bonkers. All they're doing is bombing poor little Yemen people instead of helping them as true Muslims and sending them aid and relief. We've seen these starving famine pictures. It's the most atrocious and immoral thing. And I'm totally upset that British companies, Philip May, the husband of the ex-Prime Minister Theresa May, has been helping manufacture the bombs that are falling on Yemen, and therefore buttressing the Saudi Darth Vader forces. Anyway, 150 Saudi royal members have got the virus, and it's made them think, maybe God doesn't want us to be bombing Yemen. You know, we could have told you that, guys. We have been telling you this for years. I love Arabs, but I don't like a regime that mercilessly misappropriates the good name of Islam to do atrocious deeds, which is what we've got with the way the Saudi royal family have been running that amazing Arabian culture. No, it's time for a ceasefire, and not only between in Yemen, but I'm calling for a ceasefire between all Shias and all Sunni Muslims worldwide. I'm calling for a reconciliation between all Shias and all Sunni Muslims. And in my commentary on the Quran, which is nearly finished and will be with you shortly, I've called for that again and again. I've tried to give like the Shia interpretation of a passage and the Sunni, and I'm saying, look, it's not either or. I liken this to the two beating wings of the phoenix. Islam needs both to be able to fly. And like a bird, you know, you can't flap about with one wing. So why, and the Sufi tradition also is needed for making that phoenix that is true Islam to fly again. Because to me the Sufis are the holders of the secrets of authentic Islam. They're the ones that Muhammad actually trusted with his secrets, right? And it's come down as an oral tradition ever since. Ali was an important transmitter of that. I've met many amazing Sufis. I've been taught by them. I'm a kind of Sufi myself. And yeah, it's absolutely shocking that there should be this ridiculous Shia-Sunni split. It's all just because Ali and Aisha had some ego problems with each other. Well, time to make peace, folks. It's all one big family. We need to rethink the whole thing and reboot it. And if coronavirus is going to help us do that, then I'm very grateful. Let something good come out of all this. And I would say to all my Muslim friends around the world, whether Shia or Sunni or Sufi, bless you, make peace with your neighbours, right? And listen to my commentaries on the Quran. I think you'll find them helpful. So I want to come to my work for the World Intellectual Forum, because as I've said, and you may know, this is a new body that's been set up. We're just intellectuals, We have no official status as, whatever. But we do thinking, you see. We do intellecting, which is Abelard's phrase for active thinking. I love Abelard, who was the founder of the University of Paris, and who was a great intellectual, right? And he said that intellecting is also an activity, like running or jumping or, buying and selling, all the other verbs we do as humans. Well, intellecting means actually using your mind, joining up thoughts, joining up concepts and ideas, and looking at them critically. And so that's what the World Intellectual Forum is doing. That's why I'm defending David Icke's right to speak, on the one hand, but I'm also criticising aspects of his thought and challenging him to a public debate on the other. And that's called intellecting, right? So we've met, we are, a diverse body, and it's very interesting that some of the, I don't think the World Economic Forum is coming out very well at the moment. I don't think they've been doing their job properly. And the World Intellectual Forum is kind of challenging them to get their act together, because I don't think economics merely alone is going to solve our problems. The world's in economic meltdown because of this, because it's avoided the peace discussions. And the World Economic Forum has never really taken peace issues seriously. So I challenge them to a joint meeting of the World Intellectual Forum and the World Economic Forum to discuss, we'll call it the economics of peace after the coronavirus, right? Let's have that joint meeting. We won't have it in Davos, because that's your turf. We'll have it in Paris, because that's kind of neutral ground, okay? And I wonder if you dare come. I'll just put that one out there. And talking of intellectuals, I want to also comment on another issue, which is that, some people will take, if it comes out that the evidence is that, yes, this virus was created in the Wuhan lab, It was being weaponized. It was a military project. The Chinese Communist Party had taken over the lab, and they were interested in creating biological warfare tools. But then it leaked a bit prematurely. The evidence I've seen, and the guy who's on Sacha Stone's commission, who's got this wonderful name, Del Big Tree, I don't know what that means, but hello Del, he says it can't have been a deliberate deployment because it's not powerful enough as a biological weapon. A lot of people recover, you know. So I think the evidence is that it was at the early stages of development, and then it leaked prematurely. There's a counter-argument to that I've seen also, which is that no, that's perfect because it creates fear, lockdown, economic paralysis, but doesn't kill actually that many people. So some people use the same argument as Mr. Big Tree, but turn it upside down and say that's why it's a weapon. I don't know, I suspend judgment. But what I do know is that some people will use this and say, that proves the Chinese Communist Party are evil. That proves communists are evil. Oh, and that proves that Marxism is evil. And we'll go into a huge kind of Cold War rhetoric of we all hate communists and we all hate Marxists. And there's signs that some people want to do that. And some people on the right in America will use that argument to then bash anyone on the left, anyone with slightly pinkish colour, and they'll all be rounded up and gassed, because we're like in favour of communism. So I want to say, as an intellectual from a European perspective, whose mother was a communist and a Marxist, and who's doing a commentary on Das Kapital, that isn't the response I would think is mature or intellectually robust enough. You see, and I would say that if you actually look at Marxist theory and the Communist Party's history and so on, what Mao did in China was an aberration. What the Chinese Communist Party did in its clamp down on genuine intellectuals, in its terrorism against ordinary people in the Chinese countryside when Mao was beginning his career as a bandit, and in his suppression of freedom of speech and intellectual thought after he achieved power, and in the provinces that he controlled as he came to power. None of this is in Marx. None of this is in the dreams and aspirations of the early communists. So I've done an awful lot of research on the history of communism, going back to the 19th century in France, and the milieu in which Marx and Engels were operating. I'm an expert, if you want, among many other things, as an intellectual historian on the esoteric origins of Marxism. So I've done a lot of research on that period, and what I've discovered, which is fascinating, very few people seem to either know this or care, I've been trying to say this for ages, is that there was a left-wing esoteric tradition as much as there was a right-wing one. The right-wing occult tradition that gave us Nazism is well known. It's mapped. People like Nicholas Goodrick Clark, my old colleague, wrote a book about it. He did a doctoral thesis at Oxford on it. Right-wing occultism is a recognised phenomenon. People like Steve Bannon, Nigel Farage, etc., they are representatives of that, as were Goebbels, Hitler, Himmler, and all the crew. Franco as well, who wrote a hysterical rant against Freemasonry, and Mussolini, who also did, banish Freemasonry and stuff. He said it was the work of the devil. That's where those lot are coming from, the right-wing, extreme, fascist Nazi types. But they have a love of occultism. They love it. And probably David Icke might have, dipped into that